The pursuit of Hollywood success has led many performers to experience a crisis serious enough that they sought professional help to preserve and strengthen their mental health. More and more, actors are opening up about how therapy allowed them to handle some terrifying moments in their careers. Michael B. Jordan's performance as the villainous Eric Killmonger Stevens in the 2018 blockbuster Black Panther was so arresting, some critics felt it overshadowed Chadwick Boseman's lead role as King T'Challa of Wakanda, better known as the Black Panther. Jordan dove deep to portray Killmonger, T'Challa's militant, long-lost cousin, but it seems his star turn as the charismatic anti-hero came at a price. Jordan explained in an interview with Bill Simmons that he had never spent as much time inhabiting a character who was, quote, that dark, that lonely, that painful.
And all this death, just so I could kill you.
The actor found it hard to let those feelings go. He told Simmons, once I got finished wrapping the movie, it took some time to talk through how I was feeling and why I was feeling so sad and like a little bit depressed. Psychotherapist Robin Halpern is familiar with this phenomenon and explained that the intensity of these same roles can lead to difficulty in separating the actor's feelings from the character. She explained that this is especially difficult when the characters are dealing with something that the actors themselves are sensitive to, with a performance that taps into their own feelings.
Burn it all!
Indeed, Jordan later said, Killmonger is an extreme, exaggerated version of the African diaspora from the African American perspective. So to be able to take that kind of pain and rage and all those emotions that Eric kind of represents from being black and brown here in America, that was something I didn't take lightly. When Jordan realized he was still carrying Killmonger's pain and isolation into his personal life, he sought out professional help, and while he acknowledged the cultural stigma that men in particular face about mental health treatment, he also spoke about how it truly helped him. Since his debut in Captain America: The First Avenger, Chris Evans has embodied the never say die attitude and moral center of the Marvel Universe's Steve Rogers, but he almost didn't take the role. When talking about how he dealt with mental illness, Evans discussed his anxiety, which was so intense that it actually led him to turn down the role of Captain America when it was initially offered. Instead of embracing a deal for 6 films, a massive commitment that is surely the dream of most working actors, Evans was obsessively focused on his fears.
And if I'm the only one, then so be it. But I'm willing to bet I'm not.
Afraid of losing his anonymity and becoming unable to cope with the demands of fame amidst a role that would span 10 years of his life, Evans turned to his therapist for advice, saying, I asked every human being in my life what they thought, and they said I should do the movie, and then I went to therapy. Sure enough, after working through his anxiety with a professional, he was able to come to a realization that taking the risk might be worth it. Evans is thankful that therapy enabled him to take on the role that made him famous, but he's also grateful that his fear pushed him to seek help, and even said that if he hadn't taken the role of Captain America, he might never have sought help for his anxiety. Jared Padalecki has spent well over a decade hunting angels, demons, and too many other paranormal entities to list as Sam Winchester in Supernatural. However, none of those fictional battles, or the fame that came with them, prepared him for a struggle with depression. While shooting a Christmas episode for the show's 3rd season, Padalecki was overcome by a depressive episode so serious he found himself unable to move. I walked into my trailer, sat down on the couch, and I couldn't get up. I could no longer on my own muster the will to carry on. Co-star Jensen Ackles took one look at Padalecki and knew his TV brother needed some help, so he called the on-set doctor, who diagnosed Padalecki with clinical depression. Instead of seeking treatment, Padalecki only took a few days off from filming, both because he was concerned that any longer breaks would negatively affect the livelihoods of the show's crew, and also because of his difficulty in admitting his own troubles. It took until just before the start of Supernatural's 11th season for him to break down. During a stopover in Geneva on his way to some convention appearances, he found himself sobbing uncontrollably in a public park, deeply depressed. A timely phone call from a friend convinced Padalecki to make it home to his family, where he was finally able to take a break and get the help he needed. In the end, Padalecki applied the same logic to mental health that he did to physical health, reasoning that if he wanted to get in peak physical shape, he'd employ a personal trainer. He knew he needed to do something similar to get in shape mentally. He's carried those lessons forward, starting the Always Keep Fighting campaign to raise funds for a charity that aims to give help to people struggling with depression, addiction, self-injury, and suicide. The CW's Crazy Ex-Girlfriend has broken barriers in its depiction of mental health issues, showing compassion for the difficulties of its central character as she grapples with the negative behaviors associated with her eventual diagnosis of borderline personality disorder.
Just a couple questions. How did I get BPD? Is BPD curable? How serious is BPD? Is BPD easy to fix? Is BPD genetic? Did I get the BPD from my mother? I got it from my mother, right?
That tone is something that Rachel Bloom, co-creator and star of the series, prioritized along with her co-creator, Aline Brosh McKenna. It's a kind of synchronicity that you'd expect from a scripted series. It was the process of pitching Crazy Ex-Girlfriend that led Bloom to be kinder to herself and seek out a psychiatrist for the first time. Her anxiety had led to insomnia so intense that Bloom began to become delirious, leading her to be afraid that her lack of sleep would ruin her chances of getting what would ultimately become a very personal show picked up by the network. That, in turn, led her to a psychiatrist and to work that was genuinely transformative.
Yeah, the verdict's in. I am officially, medically, certifiably, quote-unquote, crazy.
Bloom would later say, "In his office, I finally felt safe. I told him everything. Each session improved my life." It was also educational. While she was initially reluctant to use medication to help treat her mental illness, she had fears that they were something to be ashamed of or a sign of weakness. After seeking treatment herself, she admitted that those first feelings were wrong, which led to a musical number in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend's 4th season, appropriately titled "Antidepressants Are So Not a Big Deal." When Kit Harington won the part of Jon Snow on Game of Thrones in 2010, he couldn't have known that the show would be a massive success, or the level of scrutiny it would bring to his life. A relative unknown with only a few admittedly impressive theater credits, Harington was thrust into the spotlight that would follow him for the next decade. As Jon Snow found himself in the center of the battle to rule over the fictional kingdom of Westeros, pressure mounted on the young actor. When Harington broke his foot after a night of drinking before the start of Season 3, John Bradley, who plays Snow's friend Samwell Tarly, told Rolling Stone that Harington's serious approach to his craft left him down about disappointing his coworkers. In 2017, Harington discussed his character's death and resurrection with the New York Times, and the interviewer noted that it seemed that Jon Snow hadn't yet come to terms with the strange situation. Harington replied that while our world acknowledges that opening up and solving problems through therapy is a very positive thing, that's not really an option for the King in the North in his world of direwolves and dragons. Even if it was, it seems doubtful that the character would have pursued it. As Harington put it, Jon Snow isn't exactly comfortable opening up.
I don't want it. I never have.
Fortunately, that's not a trait that Harington shares with his character, and he later revealed that he was seeking treatment himself. Following Jon's rebirth, Harington was struggling with the feelings of vulnerability and doubts about his own talent, even despite his success, and that led him to therapy. Child star, teen idol, talk show host, peacock. Donny Osmond has been all those things and many more in a career that has spanned over 5 decades. His version of the song Puppy Love topped the Billboard music charts in 1972, and he'd be back at the top again with Soldier of Love in 1989. In 2008, he began an 11-year residency in Las Vegas, performing with his sister Marie Osmond. In 2019, he found himself in the spotlight in a new way as the runner-up finalist in the Masked Singer competition, in which he was disguised in a full-body costume to compete against other masked celebrity singers. It wasn't the first time Osmond had donned a colorful costume to sing his heart out. In 1999, he starred in a film adaptation of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. The role came during a difficult point in his life, when the pressure to deliver the kind of performance that would cement his adult career was fierce. In an interview in 2000, he spoke about the intensity that would lead to a diagnosis of social anxiety disorder, saying, "I thought I was actually going crazy in my mind. I remember shaking in bed and I just couldn't get out of bed. Something was wrong and my wife took me to the hospital." The film's producers brought in a therapist to work with the star, who taught Osmond to engage with his concerns rather than trying to ignore or get away from them. Osmond's work in therapy helped him to cope with the fear he still fights against today. In 2013, Marvel Studios announced that Chris Pratt would star in Guardians of the Galaxy. The deal made a leading man out of Pratt, but triggered a period of depression that would ultimately threaten the life of another actor who had been considered for the part, Zachary Levi. Speaking to Men's Journal, the eventual star of 2019's Shazam recalled that losing the role to Pratt was a blow to his self-worth and one of the factors that, quote, drove me into darkness. Levi had struggled with self-esteem since childhood, rooted in an upbringing that saw him and his sisters suffering the effects of being raised by a mother who had herself been abused psychologically throughout her life. Levi continued to pursue his career, but his mental health continued to suffer. In 2016, he flew to Australia to reprise his role as Fandral in Thor Ragnarok, only to see most of his work end up on the cutting room floor. It didn't help that around the same time his brief marriage imploded and his mother died. He would later say that, "I felt very beat up by Hollywood. I was at a place in my life where I didn't really understand why I wanted to live anymore." Instead of giving into the pain of depression, Levi reached out for help. He sent himself to a 3-week mental health retreat in Connecticut, where he saw a psychotherapist and a behavioral therapist in addition to learning meditation techniques. Therapy that he said, quote, "saved my life." It was there he received word he'd been called back for Shazam. He filmed his audition on his phone from the retreat. A week after completing the program, Levi was being fitted for his Shazam costume. If you or anyone you know is having suicidal thoughts, please call or chat online with the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK 8255.